substitution stepping in. Apparently, Clayton was ill today, so we are having another gentleman who will be joining us shortly, and his name is Dustin Statz. So Dustin Statz from Wandera, which is part of the Verizon Wireless Network, is going to be joining us as our speaker today. And Dustin, I am going to turn it over to you. So we have a special guest, Dustin Statz, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and to give us a little bit of your background and how you got into your current position and what you're up to before you get us into the presentation.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having Clayton and myself and Wandera present for this. We appreciate it. Clayton had a family emergency to attend to, so I'm one of his colleagues here on the channel side, filling in for him. We both have similar roles. He covers a different region of the U.S. here for Wandera. My background previous to joining Wandera, I held numerous sales and leadership positions within managed service providers here in Texas. And then most recently worked for an MSSP for a couple of years. So I'm pretty well versed in security, both from a network to server to Windows or iOS endpoint, and made the jump into mobile security because there's a clear gap in most companies' infrastructures and security postures for that type of product and deliverable, especially now that statistically over half of work-related traffic takes place on a mobile device rather than the traditional laptop or workstation of sorts.
And could you explain the relationship between Verizon Wireless, our sponsor, and Wandera?
Absolutely. So Verizon's one of our preferred partners. We work with a number of carriers, Verizon being our largest partnership. And Wandera is a go-to market strategy partner for security for iOS, Android, Windows 10 devices, where we work either as a standalone solution for security on the endpoint, or we also work in tandem with, and as we would say, better with a UDM or UEM like Mass 360, Jamf, Intune, a mobile iron, that sort of thing.
You just told me to advance the slides when you're ready. I just
no problem. I think there's a couple of fade-ins here if you want to hit
all right,
next couple. Yep. So really the entire purpose of Wandera and its go-to-market strategy and partnership with Verizon as a whole is ever becoming more prevalent and more obvious now, especially with the work from home and COVID-19 concerns with workforces being remote. All of their data tends to be decentralized or in the cloud through SaaS applications. The days of having storage centralized on a unique server in the back office of an organization and using a simple VPN to get to everything have kind of come and gone. And that's really where Wandera tries to address that from a carrier and provider agnostic approach. So our solutions work across all iOS versions, Android versions, and Windows 10 for data management as well. Most of the historic deliverables that really tend to focus on mobile security offer legacy architecture or traditional VPN type protection, which is increasingly difficult from a user experience and performance type piece. I think everybody knows, when you've connected to a VPN, you'll see your laptop battery take a huge performance hit. And more often than not, a lot of public Wi-Fi points actually block IPsec or the universal standard for VPN tunneling, just because it is so resource intensive on those networking devices. We can skip ahead here. So our approach to it is really the zero trust mentality. We have some new approaches coming to the market here, and currently we've got a couple of different deliverables that we'll kind of walk through. But most importantly, we're going to demonstrate the type of threats that your employees and your folks that are using corporately owned or even BYO devices are seeing in the wild, both rudimentary exploits or phishing attempts that have been reproduced time and time again, or from a zero-day mentality. Wandera's security cloud is quite simple. There's a very light application or an endpoint application that runs on the device and delivers security through the cloud. So I like to point out that none of the actual calculation or performance of Wandera's security service is taking place on the endpoint. There is no performance hit to a phone or to a laptop that's running Wandera. All of the work is being handled behind the scenes in AWS in the cloud with resiliency. So there isn't any downtime or performance hit that you're going to actually see. And everything's taking place in real time. So we're also not working from a signature-based model of old where you're waiting to identify something and then make the device aware of what it needs to look for. We can identify things proactively in real time. The way that we actually go about that is through a couple of different components within our application. One is the Wandera risk score, and that exists for both devices themselves, where we assign a 0 to 100 risk profile score, as well as for the applications that are actually installed on that device. And by enforcing unified or group policy settings for those devices in a deployment, we can actually assign different capabilities and limitations to the traffic and installations that are on those actual devices being managed. We also have third-party integrations. Probably the most prevalent one that gets used and requested the most often is for organizations that have an actual security group or department, or might be working with a managed security service provider that's doing security event monitoring, or SIM as it's commonly called in the industry. We can tie all of our log output and all of the background compute and calculation, everything that's going on within the Wandera engine, and export all of that into that security event monitoring tool, so that that team has a single pane of glass to continuously manage the deployment. And really, you only need to then interact with the Wandera portal and management tool on an as-needed basis. Now, there's a number of different deliverables we have in the Wandera Security Cloud. The first one being data policy. So if you have a number of different levels of employees in an organization, for example, leadership, you would probably set up a group policy that's unique for them and may give them a little bit more unfettered access to online applications, Office 365, any sort of productivity. Perhaps you have a marketing group that should have persistent access to Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but maybe the core group of your employees don't need access to that, especially during 8 to 5. That's where our data policy component comes into play, where you can actually implement individual groups and either block traffic altogether based on the type of connection method. That includes both either domestic cellular policy, roaming policy, or Wi-Fi. Most commonly, we'll see that used to push non-business critical applications like Netflix or Facebook off to Wi-Fi only, so that employees can still use that if they are working remote or from home. It doesn't use your corporate cellular data. And then we can also implement caps if you're not on an unlimited plan and you want to make sure you don't have users that are randomly going to 50 or 60 or 70 gigs in a month because they're streaming Netflix during the day from their device. The other pillar of our program is the security piece, or our mobile threat defense offering. So with that, we're actually using over 90 million different installations and sensors, that we call it, that are gathering and looking at the traffic that's traversing from that network inward and outward, and looking proactively for new phishing threats. You'll see on the graphic there, it says a new mobile phish is launched every 30 seconds. We're detecting that in real time, and we can actually proactively block that, alert the user to, hey, this was a phishing attempt, here's what you need to look for. Perhaps it was as simple as the domain name being spoofed and the actual login page looking very similar to something you would expect to see. I'm actually going to have a couple of examples of that coming up here in later slides. But that's one of our core elements, is being able to proactively block that before someone else recognizes it and then tells an application what to look for. The other important component for security, and especially with the remote workforce, is adaptive access. So through that device policy and security policy, we can enforce, say you're an Office 365 shop by nature, but you're not using Google Apps for Business, and the corporate-owned device has no business-critical reason to have access to OneDrive or Google Drive. We can proactively assign it an actual access policy that would unlock and enable usage for Office 365, but block the other alternatives that wouldn't have a need, or where your employee might try to log in with a personal login and use it simply out of convenience. It's more often than not, it's not for nefarious reasons, it's simply out of convenience. But that way you can control where your data stays and resides and ensure that it's not being exfiltrated onto a different platform that you don't have control over. We can go up. Yep. So there's a number of different use cases. For BYOD and corporate, kind of an overlap. We usually tend to split the two up because there are a couple of different motivators behind each business use case. Where they overlap is blocking zero-day phishing. That's really the single most prevalent threat that exists in the marketplace right now. And like the previous slide said, every 30 seconds there's a new one being spun up. We can identify based on a number of different data points and characteristics of those websites if they're trying to spoof a domain name so that it looks similar. A lot of times folks are using iTunes, PayPal, or name one of the most prevalent games that exists in the Android Play Store or iOS Store. They're using that to make it look similar to, or at least comfortable enough that a user would actually approve an installation or click through and enter their username and password. Through that same effort, we're actually looking at applications that are both installed on devices that Wandera is managing, and we're proactively scanning the iOS and Android Play Store for applications that either have leaky password entry standards. Maybe they're sending over passwords in clear text and not encrypted. More often than not, we're actually looking at applications that are asking for permissions that they have no business having. You'd be surprised how many simple games or flashlight applications that have been historically very prevalent and common are asking for permission to your text messages and phone call records. Clearly, there is no business case for those to exist, but more often than not, users kind of tend to click through and hit yes because it's like reading through an end user license agreement or a EULA. They're too long, they're too complicated, and the average user really doesn't know what they're looking at. We proactively look at that and then attempt to block it and make sure that it's not an issue. The other portion is mobile malware. That's increasing in significance and consistency, not just over Android devices as one would expect. Apple and iOS are actually about as vulnerable as Android can be from time to time, whether it's somebody sneaking an application into an app store or from sideloading an application, for example, on an Android device, or having a jailbroken iOS device and then loading their own apps that way. One of the most important components now with work from home and everybody being out and about is connecting to public Wi-Fi hotspots. Starbucks, I think, is now starting to open up a little bit, or at least, they have their Wi-Fi access turned on and you can get into the parking lot or sit outside and try to connect. You'd be surprised how many similar named Wi-Fi spots are set up as Starbucks with a Z, for example, where people will try to connect, and unbeknownst to them, they'll be walking into a man-in-the-middle attack where somebody can actually intercept and observe all of the actions that are taking place over that connection. Wandera can proactively recognize that and spin up a site-to-site VPN tunnel to encrypt all that traffic and proactively block any interference or interception of the information that's going on over those access points. And then the next and most prevalent use cases are for corporate specific. So if you as a business owner have a deployment of devices and you give them to your employees to use, you pay for the plan, you're paying for the data, and they're not necessarily supposed to be using them for their own personal usage, that's where you can enforce a bit more stringent use policy. That's, again, where we come back to being able to enforce access policy for shadow IT so that you can disable and proactively block Google Drive if you're only using OneDrive or Office 365. You can enforce content filtering, the majority of which gets assigned to some pretty obvious categories that we have set up. for adult content, perhaps hate speech or gambling or guns, that sort of thing. And then you can actually selectively enter your own domain names too. If you wish to whitelist something or blacklist something, we give you that control over it. The unique advantage of Wandera from that key point is by simply entering a domain name, say netflix.com, for example, we can block the traffic or assign it a policy based on it being used over a browser. So say they're using Safari and go to Netflix and they want to stream it, we can block it there, but then also the application. You don't have to enter a configuration twice for that. The other component is data management. Obviously, everybody's working remotely right now using their devices. Maybe they're working from their couch and checking email and responding to things that way. We're actually able to then help keep that data usage down and push applications that don't need to be using either domestic or roaming data consumption. We can push them over to Wi-Fi or block them entirely. And again, that further carries on into the adaptive access model. Now from here, we've got a couple of different case studies. There are actual links to the case studies that are on our website. If you do have any questions around them, feel free to chime in, and we can always share that information. Now, most prevalently, I think we're seeing an uptick in requests from healthcare providers, whether they're doing at-home, in-home care, or long-term care facilities, or regular hospitals and clinics. They're looking to make sure that their networks are secure because the COVID epidemic specifically has seen bad actors zoning in on them and making them an active threat and an active target for their work, and trying to either use ransomware to lock down a network and then gain money to be paid for them to unlock everything, or to simply get into the network and then exfiltrate data. Wandera has been blocking over 300 different threats per day for Vitus, and we've seen over 8,000 policy violations that get blocked in a month based on the way we've got it configured for them. Next one is with Sealy, obviously a mattress manufacturer. We proactively set up different group policies for them as well, so that we give them the visibility and the ability to know what's installed, what's taking place on their phones and mobile devices, just like they would on a laptop. And they actually recognize that the need for security on both platforms is equal and of equal importance. So now we've got a couple of interesting kind of quizzes here, challenging folks to be able to identify which page or which screen they would feel is the actual login. We've got a couple of different companies here that we've set up, and these are actual examples that we've seen in our proactive phish blocking engine. If you look at each one, they obviously both look very similar. They have the same background image, same font. Even the one on the right has all of the little application icons and everything. Does anybody care to venture a guess which one is the actual real login page? Well, if we click through, we'll be able to see which one is real here. You guessed the right. Well, if that was your guess, actually you would be wrong. The one on the right is similar. It has the same header, same information, same official app logos, but the one on the left is correct. Wandera can actually identify that proactively. Again, behind the scenes, you're probably not seeing either the credentials and encryption certificates used for the application, if it's that, or if it's coming through a browser. We're actually looking at all of the other identifying metadata behind it and the domain name, etc. On the next page, we've got one for Netflix. This one might be a little bit more common than the iTunes Store, even, I think, lately, especially with folks trying to pass some time or downtime and view something to distract themselves. Here you'll see very similar pages again. Maybe the font size is a little bit different. There's still the same 800 number for customer support and login options. Again, which one would you guys think is the actual login page? We got another guess for the right. Well, if we click through, we'll find that again, the one on the right is actually the imposter. Again, sharing a similar layout, Same customer service phone number. Terms and official conditions look identical. But yes, the one on the left is actually correct. And again, to the even trained eye looking at this, it's very difficult to discern the difference between the two. Another very prevalent one, LinkedIn. Everybody is using LinkedIn right now. This one, if you take a close look, you should be able to identify which one is real and which one is not. Depending on the resolution that you cut on your display right now, it may be a little easier or more difficult to see. But if we click through this, you'll see that the one on the right is the real login page. And exactly, if you look up top, now seeing HTTPS isn't necessarily an indicator that it is the real site. The S really just indicates that it's encrypted and you're transmitting things over an encrypted channel. Bad actors, hackers, etc., they're able to actually set up and impersonate encrypted traffic certificates as well. The domain name might be something else -linkedin.com or a number of hyphens. They can use puny URLs to impersonate it. On the left, if you look very closely, you'll see that the actual URL for that page is very long and complicated where it wouldn't normally be from LinkedIn. And the layout is different. Similar, but different.
Yes.
Probably the most prevalent one that we see coming across as an impersonated website for phishing purposes is PayPal. Within our machine learning engine that we're running on the back end in the cloud, we have a real-time indicator list of the most prevalent threat sources and what domain names and addresses they're using for phishing attempts. Whenever I'm doing a demo and I run through that page, usually 4 or 5 out of the top 10 involve PayPal in some way, just because it's used so much. Again, here you can tell by looking very, very closely at it. Yes, the one on the right has the correct URL. It's paypal.com, not paypal. Anything else. And again, the branding virtually identical. And last but not least, Office 365. This is another prevalent one that we see come across. We actually use it in our real-time phishing training that we do, or a demo that we have, where we can actually proactively phish a user that gives us their phone number and permission to do so. The Office 365 login page is one of the very most common ones that's used right now. If you look closely again, you'll be able to see the actual domain names that are used. Anyone care to venture a guess which one's real for this?
I want to say live.com.
And you can click through.
I'm wrong.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, it isn't for this instance, right? Microsoft, whether it's to their advantage or disadvantage, using MicrosoftOnline.com as a domain isn't necessarily the easiest giveaway that it's real. They use a number of different domains where you can actually still log into the service. It can be through OneDrive, it can be through PowerPoint Online, etc. But again, the average user that's going through this and gets that kind of pop-up is going to think, oh, I just need to re-log in again. And all it takes is one push of that, them entering their information. A lot of users are recycling passwords and credentials. If they can get in, to your Office 365 login, odds are statistically that you're probably using that same login for a number of other sites or a number of other SaaS applications that can then be used against them. So on this page, you'll actually see what our zero-day phishing blocking looks like. At the very bottom there is a screenshot of Miriam, our machine learning intelligence engine that's running the proactive zero-day phishing. And in that list, it's not really meant to be legible right now, but that's where you'll see historically over the last 24 or 48 hours, what are the most prevalently used URLs for phishing. And then we also have them ranked on a risk score. From there on the far left, you can see in that kind of strange geometric pattern, the different data points we use to rank and assign that a risk score. That can range from domain obfuscation or impersonation all the way down to if it's a known historically used site or IP address for that kind of threat. At the very top, you'll see what's spelled out to say Hacksaw. That's an actual demonstration tool we have where we can launch an actual phishing attempt in real time and show you really just how easy it is to impersonate a login page and get somebody to cough up credentials. At the same time, it's something that we proactively block on all devices that are running Wandera. And this goes a little bit further into detail on some of our app intelligence countermeasures that we take by looking at what permissions are assigned. Again, coming back to flashlight applications, etc. Maybe your kids want to put a game on a phone and be able to play that. More often than not, a lot of those games and different applications are asking for permissions that are not necessary. That's where we're assigning each application that's installed onto a device or in the App Store a risk score. And again, that's looking at different code patterns. Are they asking for permissions they don't necessarily need? Do they have risky behavior? Are they trying to send passwords over clear text? And maybe the developer profile that's assigned to them in the iOS store has historically had a number of applications that have been shown to be either fake or risky. We then associate it with that similar risk pattern as well. Just about everybody's probably seen some of the trends and identified different patterns that exist for malware and risk associated software that's making its way through the news. Google is constantly removing applications from their store, probably with more increased prevalence than iOS, simply because it's a little bit easier to push applications to it. One of the more prevalent ones that's floated around in the news and took quite some time to be proactively eliminated and patched was WhatsApp. That's a program, again, that a lot of people had been using. There was actually a risky version of it that had been installed and deployed through the iOS store and Android store. In all honesty, it took over 6 months to get an update pushed to the majority of users, most of whom were actually on iOS, to get an updated version of it that eliminated that threat that existed within the application. From that end, again, coming back to public Wi-Fi usage, on average, and this is before COVID, the average employee was connecting to 5 different hotspots in a week, whether that includes at home, at a library, at a coffee shop, perhaps coming into office, etc. That's where you would see, normally you would say, oh, Starbucks Wi-Fi, yeah, we'll connect to that. There's a terms of use that you agree to. Maybe it even asks you to create a username and password. More often than not, you'll see kind of similar or doppelganger type SSIDs that show up, or network names. Obviously, Starbucks with a Z should be not trusted. But a lot of times folks will see an open Wi-Fi access point, and if they don't have a hotspot set up on their phone or they're not turning it on, they'll simply connect to it. We can recognize that in real time and then again secure that connection to make sure that anything that's taking place over that network, inward or outward, is encrypted and secured. So again, from the adaptive access standpoint, that's where we're looking at making sure corporately owned or BYO devices that are used and have access to business critical SaaS applications, whether it's using OneDrive, Salesforce, Office 365, Box, we can ensure that those devices have only allowed access to what they're supposed to be able to get to. And then we can actually proactively assign each device a risk score and make sure that only devices that have been scanned and have been deemed safe and secure can get access to those applications. For example, if you had a user on the network that had a jailbroken iOS device and was trying to get onto your Salesforce instance, through device policy and the adaptive access component, we can proactively block it from being able to get access to Salesforce, where that risky device might be subject to exfiltrating some of that information that you do not want in the wrong hands. We can apply that again simply to the device itself through the Wandera Security Cloud, or we can do that in conjunction with any UEM or MDM you might be running.
We had a question. It says, even with legitimately spelled Wi-Fi spots, isn't it proximity based? if I set up a pineapple walled Starbucks inside an actual Starbucks, devices would connect to the closest, strongest signal. Is that generally correct?
Generally, yes, that would be true. If you had the exact same SSID set up and it were able to connect, and there wasn't a EULA or terms and conditions to accept on the next page, you're correct. If that's stored as a safe network ID, it would try to connect that based on proximity. Another case study example we had here was Wed Lake Bell. Most commonly, you'll see users, and historically, just about everybody that's set up a firewall within their own internal network sets up proactive blocks. Maybe it's against just simply an entire category like adult material, pornography, again, gambling, guns, you name it. That kind of policy enforcement, a lot of companies are realizing should exist on a mobile device as well, not just an endpoint that's stored within their network and connected to a firewall. You want to make sure that your employees are doing the right thing and have the access to really what's necessary and what's appropriate at all times. So from that content filtering, there's a number of different ways we can go about it. Metered access, unmetered access. If you have a unlimited plan, you can set up different policies that would match up with the type and amount of data you want to use on a daily average or for a monthly total. We can set up individual policies that will coordinate and allocate individual traffic into a personal policy or a business policy. We can block risky content like outside third-party application stores. And then we can ensure that everything is secure. And then also, if you are interested in it, you're able to actually track the location of those devices. So, we've had some companies that have a work from home force and they know they're in the US. If you wanted to find out if somebody's been, offline and hasn't been very productive for a while, perhaps they've been working remotely from Hawaii and breaking their self-imposed quarantine. That information is available there within the Wandera portal that you can see on the right side of the screen. I'll also point out that we give the administrators of Wandera installations the ability to anonymize user data. So it will simply say iOS user and then a 4-digit alphanumeric character after it. So if you don't want to know the username or email or personal identifying information of the user that's consuming a bunch of data, you can eliminate that risk or that concern and have it all anonymized, or you can choose to have it be visible. We give that control to the administrator of Wandera. From that, we've got another case study here. Cushman & Wakefield had been dealing with a large amount of data overages. I know about a month ago when we did a POC for another company that had 1,000 different devices that were out in the field, we did a POC on just 50. And within the first week, we had discovered 2 users that had been hitting 30 to 50 gigs in that first week of the month. We immediately were given the green light to go ahead and roll out data management across their entire portfolio to get that in check and to make sure that unnecessary data usage wasn't taking place. So it gives you the ability to put a hard ROI and calculate your time to ROI on any investment you might make in using MDM, UEM, and Wandera into driving down your overall plan costs and making sure that you guys, as a corporate plan holder, are on the right sized plan rather than simply just throwing unlimited at it and just kind of letting everybody go and making it the Wild West. And again, for the data management piece, there's a number of components. So from a user point of view, you have control over notifying the user. If they're roaming, that data caps are enforced. We can apply specific roaming controls. If they're say they're in network in the US or Mexico and it's part of your policy, we can have a unique data management standard set up for that versus if they go, say, over to the EU and they're in England. You might want a different policy assigned to it there so that you don't have a tremendous amount of overages at the end of the month. Again, that would typically be set up by user groups, leadership, marketing, sales, etc., depending on what your hierarchy is. And you can give as much or as little notification to your users as you want to, and all of the alerts are customizable by the administrator as well. From that, there's a number of different steps you can take. The first one being notification. If we click through here, the next one would be blocking. This is an example notification. If they're going to, say Facebook during the day and you have it blocked, they would have that little message pop up there. You can reclassify or reterm any of the fine print you have in there and have it say reach out to your IT administrator and say, hey, no, I should have access to this. Again, data capping, if you want to enforce a policy where they can only use a certain amount of data for the month. We also give you the control if, say, your user hits their cap in the third week of the month and they have another week to go, we can set up a group policy to enforce business critical applications as something that can still be used. So you want to make sure that your employees, for example, have access to email and Slack for messaging, for example. We can make sure that that's not interfered with if they hit their cap, but they can't then maybe go to YouTube or Facebook where they normally would. The other component we can actually add in is data compression. So a lot of websites are using very large JPEGs and background images. We can actually apply compression technology to that to bring the overall data usage down on average about 15 to 25% over the course of a month based on regular web traffic. That pretty much wraps up our webinar and presentation. Here's where I would traditionally go in and kind of show the portal and walk through some of that. We don't have time for that today, but I know we did have a little bit of time set up for more question and answers if there are any other ones coming up.
If anybody else has any questions, you can type in the chat box, or I can let me allow people to unmute and talk if you want to. I know Dave, sometimes you have questions. Do you want to ask any other questions, people? All right. Okay. Well, I thought that was an excellent presentation, Dustin. That was just very informative, and it gave us a quick bird's eye view of some of the newer things that we're dealing with and how you can get very granular in your structures. Does anyone else have anything to add? Jim, did you want to say anything? You have been sitting through most of the presentations today.
Well, thank you very much. This is very informative. Great information from the guys at Wandera.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really the biggest deliverable that we try to bring to the table is giving that visibility to the administrators of their networks and their devices. You should at least have an idea what's going on in that traffic instead of simply getting to the end of the month and looking at your bill and going, oh, wow, I don't know where any of it's going. This way we can actually give you that insight and the ability to proactively dictate what's appropriate, what's not, and then also more importantly to secure all of that traffic and make sure that those devices are being effectively used in the field.
You're not an MDM solution, correct? That's not a component of your tool. Mobile device management.
Yeah. That was a little bit hard for me to hear.
Oh,
Right, me
gosh,
too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's better.
That's better. Ask the question.
Yeah, so you're not a mobile device management tool. Is that a component of Wandera?
Correct. No, we're autonomous and we're really agnostic to the MDM or UEM component. Wandera can be installed on its own and exist on the device and enforce policy through a network profile. But we always like to say that we work better with and then insert the name of the mobile device management platform. Mass 360 is one of the more prevalent ones that we end up working with, but we also have integrations to work with Intune, Jamf, Mobile Iron, you name it, we can work with it.
Perfect, thank you.
Matt, did you have any questions or comments?
Hey, Dawn, this is Ben. One thing I was
Ben.
thinking of, if anybody wants to talk about this offline, would it be best to just ping you offline on Talk Louisville or otherwise from there, so we can get those folks in touch with the right resources in their
Right.
locale?
So you can send me email at Dawney@TalkLou, and Dustin, you can put your email in there, or whoever, Ben, if you want to add yours, you can add yours for a point of contact for our local markets here in Louisville. But I think we have a few people that are not in our market on the call. So feel free to add that information in the chat box. And then, we will hopefully have a chance to have some live meetings as we get into August, September for talk. And so if anyone wants to discuss anything at that time, I'm sure Ben, one of our board members for talk, as well as working for Verizon Wireless, would be able to assist you there as well. So before we leave today, I do want to mention that Talk has a join as a member button on our website, talklou.com. And for $99, you can join as an individual, and for $300, you can join as a company. And we will also be offering next week, we begin, I think it's 7 weeks of Tech Girls, which is for middle school girls. It's all virtual and online. And so anybody from anywhere can go to Eventbrite and register. There will be additional permissions for your daughter and some baseline things that you would see if you were going on a field trip, that type of thing. But it's basically online. So we're pushing forward. We hope to have a cyber readiness 6-week session again in August. We just completed one, and we'll start in the last week of August and move into September. If anyone is interested in that notification will go out in our newsletters. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter @TalkLou, as well as Facebook. So thank you so much for participating today, and I'm going to return you to your Friday. Hopefully you'll have a beautiful weekend, and we appreciate all of the time you've spent with us today to learn more about cybersecurity.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Justin.